Welcome again. Thanks for joining us. This Leveraging Green session is on the health and safety of climate change, or health and safety during climate change. Health and safety is a problem that's been, or opportunity, or however you want to think about it, an area of work for trade unionists that's been with us for a long time. And climate change, net zero, all related things like this, just transition, has thrown up new ways for health and safety, both because it's thrown up health and safety challenges. There are new dangers in workplaces because of climate change, and also the reaction to climate change. Net zero has thrown up new challenges, health and safety challenges. But also the whole, as our economy shifts and as the powers that trade unions can muster to fight climate change and to engage in climate action in workplaces and communities more generally, we can use the powers that we have through health and safety reps and through health and safety legislation to kind of to affect change. So that's the theme of our session today. We've got a couple of hours, so we've got until 4. We definitely won't go past 4. We may be able to finish slightly earlier than that. And because that's quite a long chunk to stare at a computer, we'll have a break in the middle as well. So don't worry about that. I'll introduce Graham, so you can see Graham Petersen on the screen. He's waving there. He's from Greener Jobs Alliance at the moment, historically with UCU, and with a sort of long history in the trade union movement, especially in trade union education, and he's been a long-standing advocate for green action from trade unions. Many of you will know the Greener Jobs Alliance and Toucan, the trade union clean air network, already, but I'm sure he'll speak to this in today's session. The way we're going to do this is we've got, I think it was 6 sort of themes that we're going to touch on as we go through it. So Graham will kind of introduce these, introduce some key points and talking points, and then we'll open it up for a kind of discussion in each one. So it's slightly different to the way we've done this before, in that we'll be kind of dipping in and out, but hopefully we can that will be valuable. I'm sure it will be. If when Graham is doing his piece, if we sort of refrain from asking questions or interrupting at that point, and then kind of save it to the points where we can have that discussion. It is being recorded, but we're all amongst friends, and those the recordings are going to go to friends, and so do feel open to make any contributions you want, and be as challenging as you want. Climate change is an emotive subject. Health and safety can be an emotive subject. We're at one level talking about, really what could be quite severe stuff in workplaces and in communities. So feel free to express any of those feelings. I'll just say that, so this is the 4th of our Leveraging Green series, of our series on green organising, run out of Yorkshire and Humber TUC. We have another one. The next one is on the 25th of March. I think it's 12 till 2, but we'll send adverts round. That one's on agitating for climate action, I think it's called. And so, we'll publish details on that, but that's another one coming. We've also got recordings of 3 of the 4 that we've done previously, linked from our website as well. So if you do want to go back and check if you weren't able to attend those ones, you're very welcome to dip into those and have a look. The last thing to say is maybe we will share slides. So so if you do want a reminder of what we've been doing, and I think we're happy to share those slides. I don't think there's anything else to cover by way of introduction, other than to say again, thank you for coming, and I'll hand over to Graham. I did mute you, Graham, so you'll have to unmute before you start speaking. But thanks for being here.
Right, thanks. I take it I'm now unmuted. Yeah, the invitation's something that I've been looking forward to meeting everyone on this session. I've done quite a lot of work over the years with Yorkshire TUC, even though I'm not based in Yorkshire. I'm down in London, but I've worked with Sam on some of his projects, and before that with Bill Adams, the regional secretary. So I wanted to start by just slightly reiterating what Sam said, and that is the idea is to try and make this as participative as possible and with a bit of structure. Hopefully it will work. And we've got roughly around 6 kind of areas to cover, and the idea would be to spend around 15 minutes on each, with at least half of that time given over to your thoughts on each of the discussion points at the end of it. I did attend the last workshop in January, which, although I'm not sure it was actually billed as health and safety, did spend a lot of time talking about health and safety in a kind of open discussion, which was very interesting. But I thought this workshop, perhaps if we made it a bit more structured, it would avoid perhaps going over some of the ground that was already covered. I think, it's inevitable in this series of workshops there will be a lot of crossover because of the nature of it. And so some of the things I'm probably going to cover are going to be picked up in the workshops coming up, as well as perhaps some of the earlier ones that a number of you might have participated in. Anyway, what I'll do is just start off with sharing this first of the PowerPoint slides. This is not all bells and whistles, it's very basic, just covering about 4 points on each slide, so it won't take me too long to go through them. Okay, let's hope this works. Has that worked?
Yes, sort of. Oh, no, it's gone now.
I think, no,
if you hit the
yeah, I went back into it. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah, I've already had the introduction, so probably not a lot more to say about that. Other than the title, as I say, I want to try and make the focus on this around organising rather than just a general chat about health and safety and the link with climate change. And hopefully that will be the end product that we get at the end of this session. But looking at the aims, I did say that we're going to try and focus around 6 areas, although certainly if there's anything else that you want to raise or bring up, that's not going to be a problem from my point of view. I thought it would be useful to start off by having a look at the current context for both health and safety and climate change, because I'm sure you'll agree that since the last workshop in January, even though it's just over a month, there's been quite a lot happening, which perhaps going to impact on some of the approaches we might take. Second one is on the ways in which we can organise both in the workplace and in our communities around picking up on climate adaptation. Thirdly, to specifically look at how we address the issue of supply chains, because they've got certainly implications for both health and safety and climate. Then to look at more particular aspects of this, namely air pollution and other extreme events. And then finally, just to have a bit of a roundup with thinking about some of the potential next steps. So just beginning then with this first one, before we go on to the discussion point around it. I don't want to be a prophet of doom to start off with, because I think, there's still opportunities and things that really got a lot of potential, but there's got to be a recognition that, there are issues around union capacity, both on climate work and also on health and safety action. We are talking about something that has been declining, not right across the board, but in many organisations, and the trade union movement is no exception. And of course, we've now got a kind of new political environment to operate in. The NEU, I was talking with Catherine briefly before we started the workshop, talking about the motions that the NEU are preparing. This is a draft that I had a look at yesterday, which obviously raises the point that I'm making here, that we can't ignore what's going on in America, but just seeing that, don't want to get too fixated about Donald Trump, but seeing that as symptomatic of what's happening in other countries and the impact that's going to have on our ability and as well as our tactics in pursuing climate issues. I mean, as far as the UK is concerned, obviously there have been cases that achieved publicity recently where certainly employers are starting to roll back on their policies, on their net zero commitments. I mean, yesterday, for example, I don't know if anyone saw it, but in terms of finance institutions, Wells Fargo, which is a very big finance company, just abandoned its net zero commitment and said it was going to base its finance around what its clients wanted, their priorities, rather than anything to do with net zero. We've seen, of course, companies like BP and Shell that have bowed to the wishes of, probably didn't need much pushing, but bowed to the wishes of powerful shareholder blocks who've said that the share value is more important than net zero, and they're concerned that share value is going to decrease or not go up sufficiently on the back of continuing to focus around net zero. So, it remains to be seen how far the current government in the UK rein back in on some of this stuff. There's already evidence that it has done, but whether that will speed up in the light of what's currently obviously dominating the news at the moment. So, if you do go for 5% of your GDP on military expenditure, then quite clearly, unless this magical growth is going to appear in a form that we currently can't see, then you're going to have to look at major cutbacks across a whole range of things. And we've already seen it in relation to the international aid budget, which is very closely linked to climate action. So, yeah, that's obviously a bit depressing. The other element of this, where I guess in terms of this network's concerned, is what unions should be doing at regional and local level. And the other worrying thing, going back to funding and budgets, is even the Climate Change Committee report that came out last week was clear that there are real problems building up around, to quote, the lack of clarity and limited and fragmented funding. Now, that's always been a problem, but the fact that the CCC have picked this up and identified it is clearly something that is going to be an issue if we try to engage with local authorities or regional authorities around trying to push this agenda forward. So that's a quick summary of not all, but some of the context around this discussion. And so in terms of perhaps opening this up for a discussion, one of the things that, of course, has been at the forefront of union policies around organising has been the need for environment reps, climate reps, green reps, under different titles, for legal rights. Now, there is a view that this is always going to be very unlikely, even with the election of a Labour government, and that probably there's not a lot of value in spending a huge amount of time trying to push for this, and we've got to recognise the current realities and think of other ways of organising where we can actually pick up on both health and safety and climate issues. So, be interested to see what people think about that. So let me come out of this and let's have a bit of a discussion.
So in these sections, do feel free just to jump in if you've got contributions on that, comments, questions, thoughts on those topics. Graham, do you want to sort of? We did discuss this, but I can't remember our conclusion. Shall I host these, or shall I? I'll host it.
Yeah.
Liz, we'll go to Liz first.
Yeah,
Actually, sorry, just before you do, we didn't do introductions at the beginning, so if you just want to kind of introduce yourself very briefly before you speak.
I'm Liz Lawrence. I'm Regional Secretary for UCU. What I was thinking about is one of the themes that's going to come up quite a bit, I would imagine, with the Trump presidency at the forthcoming union conferences, is the theme of combating the far right generally. I'm wondering where these issues fit in. I mean, clearly there's the issue of denial of the climate emergency, which is, but also general attacks on workers' rights. But I mean, if we think about the toxic masculinity championed by some of the far right, that often has gone along in terms of health and safety in the workplace, with encouraging workers to ignore health and safety, telling people they're big sissies if they're worried about question safety of work processes and so on. And of course, there's all the rolling back of equality and diversity initiatives going on in the States. It is the whole dismantling of what was left of affirmative action. So I'm wondering where these themes about defending the planet and defending health and safety in the workplace can be linked in with the general resistance to the far right and its sort of ideology and the way it's trying to take societies. Because that's clearly going to be a focal point for discussion at union conferences this year. So just want to put that in. Thanks.
I think that's a really important link in and entirely relevant to the health and safety thing, because this is for the reasons you've said. I think we'll take Lydia and then come back to Graham if he wants to add anything else, or if anyone has any responses to the comments made.
Liz, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've got to think about this in a gendered sort of way, because the last Hazards conference I went to, I was very struck by the activists, so many women activists in that forum. I'm the Northwest Environment Officer for UCU, and we just put a resolution through to Congress this year, which starts off positioning us in the context of the far right rubbishing anything to do with green and rubbishing anything to do with net zero. So we're actually up against a propaganda war. It's serious. I made the mistake of buying a Daily Mail and found too many examples of it. But I was thinking about, I suppose, what you were saying, Graham, about capacity. The big issue is facility time. So my resolution that's gone through Northwest Region to Congress is about campaigning for facility time, which is equivalent to health and safety officers, and somehow doing what the NEU are trying to do, which is not exactly merge health and safety, but align health and safety with environment officer work. And I'm not sure how we do that. Graham, you're the expert on this, but NEU are definitely trying to do that. They're recruiting all across Northumberland for people as health and safety reps, knowing that they're going to be green reps in disguise, as it were. Yeah.
Thanks, Lydia.
Yeah, just to quickly come back.
Yeah,
Any others? Otherwise, I'll quickly come back on those.
Yeah, come back on those and then we'll.
Yeah. Okay. I think those are all very valid points, and we've got to be clear about the responses that that we do take, because it's quite clear the way that this is being presented in terms of the far right, which has always been, in terms of health and safety, trying to kind of make a joke of it and see it as just nanny state stuff. And of course, exactly the same approach being taken as far as climate actions concerned as well. I think that, it does mean that the need for workplace organising and information, communication and training on this is going to be crucial to combat that. And so, as you say, Lydia, the issue of facility time is going to be quite crucial. And in the absence of realistically being able to expect any extension of legal rights for green reps. I think probably this is the only way currently, not to say we shouldn't still campaign for it, but that this is the only way in which we can try and actually address that. And so I think, I've seen the resolution that you mentioned from the Northwest. I think it's a very good one, and perhaps one that other unions should consider as well. Because we've got to kind of try and maximise the advantages we've got. And, the safety reps regulations, probably one of the few decent pieces of employment legislation that's still relatively unchanged and that do provide this potential. So I think, having someone like a branch environmental officer to coordinate with existing safety reps to make sure that the climate adaptation stuff, where we're seeing this kind of close link between climate action and health and safety action, is actually organised in that way. So it'd be useful if perhaps other people on the call could see the resolution and see if there's any value in looking at adapting it for their own union and their own workplace.
If you do, Lydia, if you do want to pop it in the chat, I think as a Word document, then those on the call can see it. It won't be shared on the recording because it doesn't capture the chat.
Okay.
But anyone here can have a look if they're interested. Ian's added in the comment for that he's definitely seeing this at Teesside Uni, where he works. The alt-right student group has been harassing staff and being ignored or enabled by the employer. We've got another couple of hands and another comment. We'll go through those and then we'll move on to the next section if that's all right. So we've got Marianne, then Martin, then I'll read out that comment. So we'll go to Marianne first.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I don't want to turn this into a UCU where specifically, I'm Marianne Quick, UCU bargaining negotiations official. Yeah, in addition to the sort of health and safety aspect and using the role of health and safety and the legal sort of provisions within that role, we've also been exploring how we use the ULR role. So when we're talking about political education and the far right and embedding climate justice into union training and engagement of union members, we're looking at how better to use that role of ULRs who do have facility time and do have sort of access and provision to the broader membership. And at the moment, we're doing a survey to map across how many of our green environment reps are also health and safety reps or also ULRs, and how better we use the resources we have and also the skills and interests of our broader membership. Advertising something as a health and safety rep might not engage somebody who is a climate activist in their own community, or it might not be apparent to somebody who's a ULR that climate education is something that could be a focus and a drive, especially, and I'm talking about UCU now specifically, but that we do have a lot of free CPD on climate and how do we better promote and engage members into that, because they will be or should be our activists of tomorrow if we can engage them today on some of those issues.
Thanks. Martin?
I think I was going to come in along the similar lines, actually. And I very much agree with a lot was just said there. I think for me, there's an aspect here about that disinformation challenge and the fact that we really haven't taught like a lot of the sort of slightly older parts of the workforce, critical thinking and sort of data handling. And actually the unions could do some real work in getting people to just start to question things more, just as a fundamental basic, because there's so much information that you're fed and a lot of it, whether it's far right groups or anything else, I have to pick people up constantly within my family and other people around me on certain issues. And actually, if we just got down to the basics of what fundamental skills people need to address some of these challenges, that might then help them then to engage with the topics a little bit better. And it's not just saying, it's a health and safety issue, it's a climate issue or something else, but actually it's just generally questioning things that are coming up to them. You're more likely to get liberal leaning people if they've got more critical thinking skills. So why aren't we pushing skills that align with that kind of area?
Thanks, Martin. That's a really important contribution. I'll just read out that Sam Jemison in the comments has said that they're yet to hear whether they'll get time on the workload in this workplace. They're new in post and yet I'm not sure what they'll be doing. So kind of looking at environment policies, which kind of speaks to this whole thing, right? You'd kind of expect health and safety reps to just get this time and to be able to work constructively with employers, but that's just not the case with environment reps, green reps, and others. So that overlap is really interesting. Graham, shall we come back to you, and then if you want to move on to the next bit as well?
Yeah, we move on to the next slide then, because it's all, as I say, very interlinked. Okay. So, yeah, the second one then is looking more specifically at this issue of climate adaptation. And, you know, we've seen that we just look at, you know, the public sector and say what regional and local authorities are doing. Then there is an opportunity, certainly if you're a recognised union in a local authority, to be talking to the employer about this. But even, you know, looking at this wider issue of community organising, and where reps are active either through their trades councils or through other organisations within a local area or within a region, there's clearly going to be a need to make sure that there's a trade union input into these policies. You know, so nationally the government is meant to have a climate adaptation policy, and it's also expected that local authorities and regional authorities will also have one. If in your authority they haven't, then, you know, quite clearly that's a starting point. The need to make sure that there is something that's in place. And if your authority has declared a climate emergency, like most of them have now, then it should have a climate action plan, if that's going to be meaningful, which will indicate what they're going to do about that. And that action plan obviously needs to cover both climate mitigation and adaptation. And of course, it's the adaptation stuff. I mean, the two are completely separate, because clearly mitigation has health and safety implications as well. But I suppose it's generally accepted that adaptation policies are going to be the ones that most closely align with some of the health and safety measures that are going to need to be put in place in workplaces and in local communities. Now, I mean, I've looked at a number of climate adaptation policies, both regional and local authority ones, and one of the commonalities in them is that they quite often, well, virtually in every case, I don't think I've seen a decent one, to be quite honest with you, that they don't actually talk about the workplace, and they don't talk about, you know, the health and safety implications, occupational health and safety implications of this. Then the other main criticism is, and if this wasn't the case, then perhaps the first one wouldn't be a problem, but unions aren't involved in this process at all. That's not to say that in many cases the employer or the organisation that's drawing this up are going to be hostile to union engagement. And to some extent it comes back to us, because we're not knocking on the door and saying we want to be involved. You kind of think it might be easy to get a seat at the table, not always, but because unions, going back perhaps to the capacity point or priorities, aren't knocking on the door, then by and large these policies are just being put out there without any workforce engagement at all. And so therefore it's not a surprise that there's, you know, a lack of reference to occupational health, never mind, you know, trade union issues. GND, Green New Deal bargaining, has been mentioned already, I think. And in fact, I think at 4:30, I'm going on a UCU event to actually get an update on how that's progressing. And I know we talked about, we don't want this dominated by UCU, but, you know, Green New Deal bargaining is a very interesting approach as a way of dealing with this. And of course, it's something that should take up the issue of facility time, apart from anything else. But clearly it needs to address both climate adaptation and mitigation. So, you know, certainly in UCU, I think the view's been taken that this is the kind of mechanism which is likely to be most successful in trying to address this. So those are just some points about how we might, or some of the issues that need to be thinking about in relation to adaptation. And of course, that's not the final list by any means. So just going back then for discussion. Oh, sorry, I didn't put up the the discussion point. Sorry. So yeah, discussion point here was going back to GND bargaining. My view is that it could be relevant to every union and sector. I know we've got other unions apart from UCU on the call, so it'd be good to get a view about whether this is just one union that wants to pursue this particular approach, and you know, regardless of whether you go down the GND route, what are the kind of organising implications for how unions can actually get into discussions with either their employer and or their local authorities to make sure that these climate adaptation policies are actually fit for purpose. So let's go back then and have that discussion.
Thanks, Graham. Alexis, your hand shot up first. Over to you.
So, hello, I'm Alexis Percival. I'm with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service. I'm not union, so my union rep is here, Ian, in Lawrence. One of the big challenges that, so I've written a climate adaptation plan, and as you said, Graham, I have included a lot of the stuff about workplace environments because that is a really critical thing going forwards within the NHS. But also because we're an ambulance service, it's a mobile workspace. So back of an ambulance, back of PTS, wherever it might be. And one of the things that I think most organisations do fall foul of with climate adaptation is they always think about an estate. And in fact, nobody really cares if their house is flooded. They are not coming to work if in the event of major flooding in and around Doncaster, for example, which is set to be a major flood zone. So we do need to deal with and understand how our workplaces, our workforce, our staff, and then looking at patients and our communities and how we embed that going forwards. Ian has only just joined me, well, it's probably about 6 months or so. So I think the unions are still very much at the beginning. I'm feeling within the NHS and within quite a lot of different parts of union space of engaging on the green agenda. And there is so much opportunity to use them as a means to pressurise a lot of the organisations that aren't engaging correctly on this. I'm really interested to see with the health and safety agenda, because it's all about upper and lower limits, temperatures, working within particular guises. How could we help facilitate the health and safety reps, union reps, to drive that climate awareness of, okay, we're looking at a 2 degree, 3 degree temperature rise. We're looking at 40-degree summers. We're looking at more flooding. We're looking at all of these things. How can the Green New Deal help facilitate that and being used as the pressure force from unions to drive the climate adaptation agenda, because it really is, it's very much in its infancy and it's not pushing things forwards at the moment. So it's more of a kind of question of how do you think we can help utilise it?
Thanks, Alexis. I think what we'll do is we'll take multiple questions and then we'll kind of we can have that discussion. It's interesting you say, just to kind of immediately reflect that this is new for some ADs. It's brand new. Some unions aren't doing anything. Other unions have been doing this since the 90s, of course. You know, the first kind of calls for this were in the early 90s, and so they're kind of, the maturity of discussion is hugely variable. It's quite an interesting topic. Martin's hand was next, so we'll go over to him now.
It's just a quick one for me around. I think it's quite good that the TUC's got a pack now, and there's some case studies building up, and various bits that can help people kind of formulate this. But I think for me, we could still do with like a to Z of like, these are the things you should be talking about for your lead negotiators, because it's all well and good us coming together and having these conversations and upskilling us, but we're not necessarily the lead negotiators for the unions. And we might be for specific areas within the unions, or we're helping the unions to evolve their thinking. But actually, when it comes down to it, is what we should be doing is handing, like, here's a nice little structured pack from all of us who are kind of experts in this field. Now go away and embed this. And this is what I've been saying within my union is that we need to upskill our lead negotiators to understand this is BAU practice. This isn't something that's a separate additional like area. This is fundamentally cuts across all of the different areas, from payment rewards right the way through to your core policies and HR and operational practices. So I think we as a group could be doing more just to pull in some resources like that we can hand to negotiators that can then formulate these kind of things. And yes, we can have green bargaining claims, and that's great, but the people that are making the difference are those people that are in those rooms and talking to those kind of lead peoples, and how do we enable those to have the right knowledge to be able to get across the points that we want to then sort of evolve in these policies on dealing with floods, you know, sort of wildfires, infectious diseases that have come in, then, you know, the threat of invasive insects, and then the food security and all those things that are the social value stuff that then comes back through your employee value offer. So I think for me, it's good that we're talking about adaptation. It's really important that adaptation and mitigation is built into how we as a union approach negotiations, but we need to be doing more to enable our negotiators to do that.
It's a really interesting point to raise. Thanks, Martin. The next, a lot of hands. The next hand is Liz.
Yes, I was wondering how this fits in with patterns of working hours. I mean, in some parts of the world, people adapt to higher temperatures by starting work very early in the morning, then having a long midday break, and then perhaps doing some more hours in the evening. Now, with some work patterns and practices, you can flex the hours, and others you can't. Obviously, you can't in an emergency service. You've got to go to the emergency when it happens. With some activities that are pre-planned, you can have flexibility about hours. And obviously, there's a whole question about whether work can be done from home, assuming the home is a more comfortable place or not. There's also all the issues about travel, isn't there? And, you know, safety conditions when traveling, if it's very hot weather or very cold weather. There's also the question about how you get a reasonable management attitudes. I remember when I was working, sometimes you'd have snow and inclement weather, and the police would say, don't travel unless your journey is absolutely necessary. And the university was saying, come into work or else. I mean, at best, the or else is you'll be forced to take a day's holiday or lose a day's pay. Or it might be even, you know, threats of disciplinary action or something. So I think there's a question about how people can be supported to work safely, how far working patterns can be varied as part of the adaptation. Obviously, there are also issues about, you know, the workplace, and the problem, of course, that there isn't I don't think there is a maximum temperature at the moment beyond which you can't be forced to work, and air conditioning and designing buildings to be, well, environmentally friendly, neither too hot or too cold. So I think it just seems a really big area, but very interesting one. But I think it's not been started on in many organisations much as they're thinking about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. That's great. We'll take, being that we've started, we'll take all the contributions at once and then come back. We'll go to Marianne and then you after that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think we touched on this in one of the workshops where we looked at bargaining. Going back to one of the earlier speakers around it, it'd be helpful to have a sort of calendar of potential negotiations or claims being submitted around some of these elements. So there's a sort of a head of steam built up that we're not talking about responses to excessive heat when, you know, we've just hit 45 degrees, that we're preempting some of these things. But also getting into the mindset of collective bargaining around us bargaining for tomorrow and not yesterday. So there's an element, we do need to be proactive about some of this stuff. We know this is happening, is going to happen. And so how do we sort of make space in our branches, in our organising, in our campaigning to say that this is a priority area? Because a lot of the time the work that we do in unions is all reactive. It's reactive to here's another section 188 claim, here's, you know, here's another latest attack on contracts, or we need to create space. And I think that idea around where would this best fit in a calendar that would suit, you know, and we could have some good organising and campaigning and getting some promotion around this, you know, a claim should be submitted around how we're going to deal with some of these issues. For the education sector, there was some really good research done by Education International around how, with schools in particular, and they're based in communities, when climate crisis hits in local communities, it is the educators, it is the public sector workers that are the first responders to crisis, you know, to things like climate crisis impacts. And how do we ensure that workers, whatever sector that they work in, on also doing the clear up operation, that this is something that could be preventable. That's the whole basis around health and safety, isn't it? That it's foreseeable. And building into claims, whether it's Green New Deal claims or health and safety discussion forums, that this is up there and on the agenda, and employers have managed the risk as best they can, and there's some assessment and some plan in place, and we need to create space for us to be able to do that.
Thanks a lot, Marianne. You.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Yeah. Sorry, I joined the meeting late, and I might sound a bit angry because I finished come out of the workplace social inclusion meeting, and I was just like, oh. So yeah, I think I missed some of the discussion as well. I think before I start, I just wonder if I can be added to the chat, because I think I can't send messages yet. I'm just going through some of the messages other people posted, and I may have missed a little bit of the topic as well. Sorry, Sam.
That's fine, yeah.
Thank you. And I think I have a general question, I guess one of the main questions about our branch, because I can see Karen's also in the meeting here. We're the local branch of University of Warwick Unison Green Officers, co-officers this year. And we are actually we just passed the motion at the AGM to recognise green facilities time and actually make it a big deal into formal facilitation agreement and a facilities time agreement and a negotiation way. Plans for the branch this year for green reps. And I think there's loads of tangible questions about what that looks like, because for us it's very new. We don't really know what the universities may want, where we might benefit from keeping the terms a bit more vague, where we might benefit from making it very specific so that we can't be left out, I guess, in some of the processes. And we got some level of support from, I guess, National Green Network, but at the same time, there's still many, many questions kind of unanswered. So I wonder if it's anybody at all that has successfully set up some level of agreement with the employer about green reps, how to get green reps to give us more power, more time, more resource, more seats at the table, anything like that, or any kind of example agreements as well that has been worked well in a similar setting. Thank you. That's a general question I've got.
That's great, thanks. I don't know how to add you to the chat, I'm afraid. So I don't know how to do that. I've had to click around, but I'll keep clicking and see what happens. Graham, do you want to come back on any of those points?
Yeah, just very quickly, because I know potentially we're getting up to our break time, aren't we? Yeah, I think coordinating claims and information exchange is going to be really crucial on this, particularly as, you know, if you look at, to be honest, if you look at a lot of union websites, it's virtually impossible to find anything that is actually going to assist with it. I mean, there's some notable exceptions, but you know, even the TUC website, it's hard to navigate that to actually get to some of the information that might help with this. We were having a discussion with Sam earlier about the fact that, you know, there is a Wales toolkit for green reps, which does have a lot of guidance in there, which, you know, people have just indicated is something that reps are going to need if they're going to sort of really be able to respond to climate adaptation initiatives or initiate them themselves if the employer's not doing anything. And I know there's a TUC one that's about to be launched, and that people will be able to access that soon as well. Just one other thing to mention that may be of use. Of course, you know, the 2025 is the TUC year of action on climate, and we hope that you know, unions and the TUC generally will be putting resources into that. I'm pleased to say that in the Northwest Hazards Trust that I sit on, along with, you know, Greater Manchester Hazard Centre, Green Jobs Alliance, we have actually been able to get some funding to write a toolkit on climate adaptation, and there's going to be a number of workshops launched in the spring and the summer to support that. So the idea, still very early stages, would be that, you know, in the lead up to TUC in September, TUC Congress, there will be something available to union reps which does try and address some of the points that you've raised about kind of like an A to Z of, you know, what should be done around climate risk, climate adaptation. But of course, that's for a bit further down the line. But I think we might want to come back to some of you to get some ideas and input into that. So Sam, I don't know what you want to do, whether it's, I mean, there is potentially one, if we're going to split it into two lots of three, one more
well, that's what I'm
slide, or
thinking. We might run out of time otherwise. So maybe if you could, if you do your next slide, just so we have it, and then we'll go to break, and then we can do the next three topics after that.
Sure.
Thanks everyone for your contributions here. It's really it's great to hear the creative juices flowing, if that's not a horrible expression. And yeah, it's I'm noting down so much. I'm sure lots of you are. Graham, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, just another 4 points. There's a lot to be said about procurement and supply chains, but clearly there is a very strong overlap with health and safety, and not least, you know, when we look at some of the debate that's going on around poor standards of retrofit and how that's giving the whole retrofit agenda a very poor reputation, and, you know, providing ammunition for people who don't want to go down the net zero route, and putting off people who own or control properties from engaging with retrofit. So, you know, often these are exaggerated, these stories, but they are out there, they are a fact. And it is a fact that, you know, because of the poor level of skills that we've still got in this country, that a lot of the work being done on a subcontract basis, so it's just subcontracted down the line. So you're often just getting individual operators that have not really had any training and doing a job on the cheap, which is leading to both poor standards for their own health and safety and people who are exposed to their practices, but also for then the tenants or the homeowners who have to live with the health and safety consequences of the poor quality work that's been done. So, you know, that is a real issue. And if we see retrofit as being a really big source of jobs, future employment, and B, actually vital to get anywhere near achieving net zero standards, then that's obviously something that's got to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Now, one way in which it might, although certainly not automatic, but you'd like to think that if a lot of this work was increasingly brought in-house, then standards would improve, not just on health and safety, but on conditions of employment and on things like union recognition. And that's where I think one thing that, I mean, certainly in Green and Jobs Alliance, we're looking to see how far this can be explored and developed. I mean, as you may know, anyone who's been involved in procurement activities, that there is something called social value, where when you're actually putting things out and making assessments about how to go forward, there is an opportunity to factor in a range of things that could include potentially both health and safety and climate standards. And the reason why this is so important is because going back to employers' net zero plans and their climate emergency statements, then what's called scope 3 emissions, which in many workplaces represent often 80–90% of the total CO2 emissions of the organisation. In other words, they're the kind of indirect emissions that come in through the supply chain, contracting work out, and so on. They are the most difficult to address, but clearly they need to be addressed if employers are going to stand any chance of meeting their targets, and if the UK is ever going to achieve its net zero ambitions by 2050. So that's, I think, something which I think is an area that unions could usefully start having a look at. And for example, in my borough, where I live, London Borough Wandsworth, we are engaging with the local authority about how far this could be utilised. So, for example, in my local authority, the social value factor is only 5% in terms of factoring that into the procurement process, whereas in other London boroughs is 10%. So, therefore, the opportunity to actually adopt better standards within that process is far higher. And I think unions need to be, and again, there's perhaps a community thing in terms of what their local authority are doing around it, because I think the trade union position is to still try and bring as much of this work back in-house, and so potentially this is a way of doing it. So there's obviously other standards that can be employed to try and look at some of these issues around health and safety and environment on supply chains. You've got the UN Global Compact that covers some of this, and importantly, the ILO fairly recently added this to its declaration on principles and rights at work. And of course, there are currently claims through the courts around the actual application of that in terms of workplace standards. So that's an area that I think is a very big one, and again obviously it relates to capacity, but an interesting one, I think, to see how far we can actually utilize this. I mean, on a much wider discussion around supply chains, obviously there's been issues around whether or not the whole kind of renewable energy process should actually be based around building in the UK, whereas at the moment, obviously, the supply chains for renewable energy are often offshored, particularly to the Far East and China. And so traditionally, the union position has been we need to actually bring all this back to the UK. I think recently there's been an acceptance, I don't know whether this is something you'd agree with me on, but that's not realistic because we can't actually get the infrastructure in place in time to actually be able to achieve the climate targets we've set ourselves. So there's an argument saying that ship sailed. We've got to recognise that we are going to have to be bringing in a lot of the equipment and products from outside in order to actually use them in the UK. Whether that's going to be something that we come back to at some point, I don't know. But certainly at a local level, in terms of what we might be able to do both regionally and locally, there's, I think, a lot of potential for how supply chains and social value could actually be utilised.
Thanks, Graham. There's a few comments in the chat which are really helpful, and I think those questions are worth dwelling on. But I think it's 3 o'clock now. If we will just pause for a break in case anyone wants to have a break, toilets and coffee, and if we come back at 5 past, so in just under 5 minutes, then we'll pick up where we left it, and we'll come straight to Sophie, who will have her hand up then still, I'm sure. So yeah, should we just do that? We'll just give it 5 minutes and then come back in a moment.
Sure.
Okay, well, if we start to reconvene, we are slightly behind schedule, but I'm sure we'll make it up, and it doesn't really matter. It's just good to have the space for the discussion in the first place. So just reflecting on what Graham was saying there, so I think it's really important that element, that kind of poor accountability being itself a health and safety problem, an occupational health and safety problem, but also a wider society health and safety problem, and yeah, the length of supply and the length and complexity of supply chains again being a health and safety problem, which again, and both of these being climate change problems. There's various bits in the chat there. So we've got Liz has talked about subcontracting and worse standards of employment for workers in subcontracted units already being a key issue for UCU, as they are across public sector workplaces especially, but also across the economy, I'm sure. Martin, who has had to leave us, but said that I think we have got unions to do internal, if we had unions do internal review of how each union operated in terms of supply chains, set up working groups to help each other, we'd have direct influence, lots of spending power that we could use on supply of good companies, then enhanced knowledge and permanent staff that could then be applied also in negotiations, raise profile of importance in this area. He suggests the TEC should be involved in doing that. I'm not sure anyone would listen, but we can give it a go. And then he's off. And then, as there are unfortunately a few other people, and I think that's the kind of comments there. So if we want to briefly open this up to a quick discussion on procurement, supply chains, and health and safety, if anyone's got any comments to add there.
We had a discussion in our Trades Council about how health and safety has basically been offshored, and so in the movement of in production going out abroad, then health and safety has been offshored, and so there's that whole. I think it's important that we do challenge it and bring back. So we've exported the death and whatever practices to elsewhere by not doing manufacturing ourselves, which is worrying. And I can speak to retrofitting and health and safety. I was told about someone that had some retrofitting done in their own home, and the contractor, no matter what they'd said, oh good, now you've got to come to put insulation in. It was roof insulation and underfloor insulation. A private small company doing it. And he managed to chop his finger off the end of this, and you sort of going, oh. So yeah, they'd stressed you've got a mask and whatever, and they'd done all they could as the householders, but it was just that. So
Oh boy. You has a hand up.
I just want to echo the point about offshoring health and safety. Again, it's the carbon footprint as well being exported as in terms of, you know, how to bring us to net zero. We just offshore them and export them to other countries who can't say no. And I think there's a general discussion point I saw in the slide about supply chain and whether it's too late to do it ourselves. I do want to add one point. I think from my perspective, for one, there seems to be a lot of scope for things that still can be done fairly quickly and make a huge impact. For example, there were some plans in my workplace at university to change the heating systems and cooling system to heat pumps. And that's something that's fairly doable. There's, you know, knowledge and technologies and resource locally to do that. So it seems like there's a gap between, it depends on what it is we're talking about. If it's something really big, a national, I don't know, nuclear power development, it's a very different thing. But there are so many things that workplace can do and should be doing that seems to be not happening. For example, the university was getting some big challenging setbacks because it was like, oh no, the ground level is not even and secure enough, so we can't possibly do it anymore. Have to think again. But again, it's something that if we're not committing to do it ourselves, we'll never learn what's possible. And I think if I remember correctly, this is because I grew up in China, but growing up, it was not the case that we had any technology that's good enough to export, good enough to support. But I think the general principle of we have to learn it, and because we have to do everything ourselves with time, that, you know, that the investment and profit turns to capital you can reinvest back into yourself and technology. So a lot of things I wouldn't think growing up that was possible, it seems more possible now because of that commitment to do medium, long-term and super long-term planning. And it seems like it was happening much faster than I would imagine. Maybe if you told me what we're capable of now, to me 10, 15 years ago as a kid, I wouldn't be like, that's, you know, that's unheard of. So I do feel like from my perspective, it seems like it's worth committing to that. But it just depends on what level that's worth pushing for.
Thanks. Sam's added in the chat that I wonder why heat pumps haven't been used for a long time. They've not in the UK, have they? Well, we haven't been using heat pumps for a long time, but they have been in other countries. Scandinavia has been using heat pumps for decades, as have other countries. It's interesting the way things go and the messes we find ourselves in for this kind of you know, and it's fine until there's a crisis, right? Electric cars were invented 130 years ago, but didn't really catch on because it was easier just to burn dead animals and plants. But turns out that was a bit of a mistake, given what we know now. Graham, if we come back to you and then also move on to the next bit as well.
Yeah, I think this is this is an interesting debate, and one that I think probably needs to be a bit more developed within the trade union movement, because it's a massive issue. And if you're looking at the kind of wider context in terms of industrial strategy, because you could say that there are very good arguments for having high percentage social value components in the procurement process, but of course there's going to be kickback from that, because people will say that's interfering with the free market. But then equally, all the current discussions around tariffs is interfering with the free market as well. And in my view, it's going to be interesting to see whether we get some parts of the trade union movement arguing for a tariff-based approach, particularly in relation to China. So where it would be saying, in order to actually try and promote UK manufacturing, we need to slap tariffs on China to encourage UK production. That's, I think, not really been much of a debate so far in the trade union movement, but I think, it's something that's likely to come up, because we are entering into a tariff war, and, there may be discussions that need to take place around that. So that's, I think, one that be useful to discuss. And I think, where there are any positive examples of where supply chain issues in relation to health and safety and climate have been positively addressed, it'd be worth putting those examples out there. Right, okay then, so pressing on, and just moving on to the last 3 slides. So if you can all see that, what I think, if you remember, we said we'd finish up with was looking at a couple of more specific aspects of climate adaptation. And one of them is, of course, air pollution, that has received a lot of publicity and trade union activity over the last few years. And of course, it's something that cuts very clearly across both health and safety and climate issues. That, you know, the burning of fossil fuels is a major contributor both to global warming and to poor health and safety. You know, the estimates from the UN are that something like 90% of the world's population are actually exposed to unsafe levels of air pollution. And certainly that's the case in this country. We're part of that 90%. So there's a role clearly for lobbying both the government and regional authorities to improve standards. I have to say that, you know, despite maybe some people had high hopes of the current government that it would start addressing some of these issues, but I'm afraid so far the performance has been nothing to get too excited about. The reason I say that is because, you know, we've been trying to get meetings organised with the Clean Air Minister, someone called Emma Hardy, who's actually, I think, ex-NEU. So we were hoping that she would, because of her union background, be amenable to have some discussions looking at standards. Because, you know, the problem we've got at the moment, as I'm sure a lot of people recognise, is that the standards for indoor air pollution, particularly, you know, when it comes to workplace indoor air pollution, are absolutely abysmal. You know, that you can be exposed to the World Health Organization standards for particulate matter for outside air, ambient air, are 200 times better than the standards for particulate matter exposure indoors. You know, so that's a huge discrepancy that needs to be addressed. And we've actually, in conjunction with the NEU and others, have signed a letter to, or addressed a letter to Emma Hardy saying we'd like a discussion about this because, you know, this is pretty outrageous and a real gap in terms of worker protection. But unfortunately, we didn't receive any response. So then we thought we'd try the Minister for Public Health, who at the time was someone called Andrew Gwynn, which I'm sure you know, subsequently has been in the headlines and removed from his post as a minister. So that one's not got very far. There's now a new minister in place, and we've written to her, and we'll wait and see whether or not we get a response. I'm not too optimistic because, you know, more powerful organisations in this space than the Trade Union Clean Air Network have been trying to have meetings to discuss these issues, and they've all met with no response at all. The only person who was able to get a meeting was Rosamond Deborah Kesey, who, Rosamond Kissy Deborah, who was able to get a meeting with Emma Hardy, but that was only on the back of agreeing a settlement over what happened to her daughter, who you may remember was diagnosed in a death certificate with having air pollution as a contributory factor in her death. And so the claim was brought, and in part of the settlement that she insisted on was that she wanted a meeting with the government minister. And so that's the only meeting that's taken place on the back of a legal claim. So, you know, we're a bit disappointed in this, to be quite honest. At regional level, there are meetings planned. So we've got a meeting arranged with, in terms of the Greater London Authority, there's a meeting being arranged with the Minister for the Environment, Deputy Mayor of the Environment, and that's taking place this month. So we'll see what kind of commitments are made at that. But just to finish off in terms of this slide, one of the things that we're trying to do is up our activity this year. 2024 was actually a very busy year for Trade Union Clean Air Network. We produced a briefing paper for government lobbying, we produced a film, and we produced guidance for union reps. And so we've got these events that I touched on earlier that are taking place in the spring and the summer. And they're going to be part of a wider discussion around climate risks, but where air pollution is going to be a big component part. So in terms of discussion point, I've just put up here, you know, it'd be interesting to find out what's happened in Yorkshire region around this. And also, you may have noticed from the previous slide that there isn't actually anything scheduled for the North East. We thought we'd just try and keep it manageable with the first 4 events in other countries and regions of the UK. But that's not to say that at some point we couldn't look at doing something in the North East as well. But I think as a general point, you know, that obviously implies capacity and also, you know, how far this is an issue in the region, which is likely to be something that's going to get some kind of attraction. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and then so get back to screen. And any questions?
It's potentially worth saying that yeah, Toucan has some excellent resources here, so I will share them with the including Green Jobs Alliance stuff. More generally, I'll share with the group afterwards. Catherine,
could you just repeat the figures about the indoor air pollution sort of levels against the outside ones? I sort of have a clue of it, but I just wanted you to sort of say it again there.
Yeah, I think they're worth knowing and actually putting out there because, you know, we did some, the reason why this has come up is because we did some monitoring, air monitoring in one of the outdoor markets in Tooting where I live. And these markets are now major entertainment spaces with a lot of cooking, restaurants and bars, but are very busy in the evening. And we did some measurements of particulate matter, and we were getting readings of, I don't want to be too technical, 4,000 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, the standard for outside air is 20 micrograms per cubic meter. And so, in other words, what people were being exposed to inside these markets was 200 times the official World Health Organization standard. And, you know, you could say, well, people going in there for a meal or a drink likely to only be in this kind of space for an hour or two. But of course, the people working there are likely to be in there for upwards of 5 or 6 hours. And, you know, the exposure levels there are going to be off the scale. So that's what we use the basis for the film that we produced. And, you know, it's just a 10-minute film worth having a look at and using as a way of kind of trying to illustrate this point, because, you know, our view is that it's not just our view. I mean, even Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, has made the point that indoor air pollution has not been subject to the same level of research and attention as outdoor air pollution. And that, you know, when we talk about indoor air pollution, obviously we're talking about people in their homes as well as at work, you know, but the fact that people spend about 90% of their day indoors means that it's clearly, you know, a major priority. You know, if you're not really ignoring or have no decent standards for where you spend 90% of your day, then there's clearly something wrong there. And the problem, as far as the workplace is concerned, is that under the Health and Safety at Work Act and the management regulations, you know, the standard that's in place is something called the workplace exposure limits. And for particulate matter, 2.5, which is the stuff that can't just simply get into your lungs, it can pass right through your lungs into your bloodstream. You know, it's this 4,000 micrograms level, and that's the one that the Health and Safety Executive needs and the government need to address to ensure that you know, these sorts of protections are in place.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll go. Sorry,
yeah,
Catherine.
I was just going to comment. The certainly classrooms have become were studied considerably, you know, during the pandemic because of the air quality and COVID monitors. But there's also enormous amounts of nylon carpets with fire retardants, and you know, and it's huge. And you know, when you spent a lot, everything has been that previously was wood or lino or whatever has now been replaced by the
Yeah, definitely. We'll go to Liz, and then just to keep time, we'll move on to the next bit as well. Liz.
Yes, I was just thinking about this issue of how you make air pollution and poor air quality visible, because with some hazards at work, you could see them. You could see that something's unsafe. They've got wire sticking out of the wall or something. But I mean, one of the fundamental insights of a lot of training and literature about health and safety at work is that, you know, not every worker can know everything about every hazard. And there can be some hazards which are quite invisible. And I was just wondering about, you know, what work can be done to help people see the hazards more, to make it more visible, and whether that's something unions need to be putting more resources into.
Well, I think so, and we've offered kind of air monitoring services to unions, because I think if, you know, people have actually got the equipment and, you know, you can actually get the readings in real time, you haven't got to sort of take them back and get them assessed and then show them to people. You know, you can actually be with a group of workers and say, well, look, this is the actual level of exposure that you're, you know, whether it's nitrogen dioxide or you know, particulate matter that you're exposed to. So I think that's something that's certainly worth looking at. I mean, I've got a meeting tomorrow with one of the reps from Belper, the pilots union, because they're really worried that, you know, their members are actually having to go to places like Delhi, which is probably, you know, I mean, London's bad enough, but Delhi is kind of completely off the scale in terms of pollution levels. And, you know, their members have got to go there, and they're worried about their exposure levels as part of that side of the job. But yeah, I think that's something that we need to look at. I mean, I think you're right. You know, some of these things are invisible, aren't they? I think with some levels, some types of air pollution, like in this market, you know, you come outside and you go on the high street, which is heavily polluted, and you're actually thinking, great fresh air, you know, because you can actually feel and taste the pollution that you're actually exposed to. But that's not always the case, and this is a problem, isn't it? It's a bit like climate change issues, you know, the fact that you can't actually, you know, it's not immediate necessarily, although that's the value, if you want to look at it like that, of climate adaptation, because it is much more in your face in terms of an issue compared to, you know, what's happening at a much slower pace in terms of the gradual warming of the climate. Should we move on then, Sam?
Thanks. Yeah, shall we? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so just the final one in terms of, we mentioned air pollution, then in terms of particular aspects of climate.
Sorry, you're not sharing the screen actually.
Oh, sorry. Okay, let's go out and start again. Okay, I think this should work. Okay. Is that all right?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah. Yeah. The recent reports that have come out in relation to this show the extent of the problem, and the huge numbers of people that are actually dying across the world from extreme heat and other extreme weather events. We've now started building up a campaign on this, as it's kind of the realization setting in that certainly extreme heat, that side of the scale, rather than extreme cold, although that can still be an issue, is something that does need to be addressed. So when we're starting to get those 40-degree summers and above, it was quite clear that the existing standards weren't sufficient, and that workers needed better protection. So, the TUC have actually got policy on this. 9 or 10 unions that have signed up to the joint union heatwave protocol that the NEU brought out. And we did talk about working flexibility, didn't we, in the discussion before the break? That, patterns of working hours and whether or not you can use extreme weather agreements to limit the exposure to the hazard. And I mean, the one that's received a lot of publicity recently that could be worth thinking about in terms of what we might need in the UK is if we say that there should be some legal rights to remove yourself from risk. The current law, is very vague on this. Anyone who's tried to use it probably know. And so what they've done in Spain, and of course this was off the back of national emergency and a catastrophic event, if you remember the floods in Valencia, that very soon after that happened, the Spanish government agreed to 4 days paid time off where workers were exposed to extreme weather. Because what happened there, was a lot of workers were actually trapped in their factories, workplaces by that, because there was no provision in place for early warning and then evacuation. So, whether we could get something like that in this country remains to be seen. But in the absence of any kind of legal national standard around it, this could be part of, obviously Green New Deal bargaining, or whichever way, a union wanted to pursue it, just in a direct discussion on a health and safety committee with the employer around some kind of standard to be employed when it comes to extreme heat. So I know we're running out of time. I'm just going on to the discussion point. It'd be interesting to know whether or not anyone here has had this discussion with the employer, whether there is any sort of policy on it, and whether unions were actually consulted. So let's just go back, and any points on that people want to raise?
Alexis?
Within the NHS, we've started, and I mean literally just started, so in the past 2 years, started collecting the data through ERIC returns, which is the estates returns information collection, to look at the amount of extreme heat days and the amount of flooding events. We don't have that as a data collection centrally, so this is quite a useful aspect, but the one of the big challenges has been the perimeters and who qualifies it and who says where it is and the limits are. And I think for a lot of us in the NHS, we've had some hospitals that have hit 40 degrees inside during the extreme heat wave, which for patients, is not great. For those working within those environments, it's just been a scrabble for that extra energy requirement, lots more fans, lots of cooling devices and various other things. We're not ready. Let's just say we're not ready for adapting to any of this stuff. Obviously, I think the unions, through a lot of those incidents, have jumped on the back of going, we need to ensure that our staff are safe in those situations. But what happens is the following day the temperature drops 20 degrees, everybody's forgotten about it. So it's what's starting to come through is the national EPRR, so the emergency preparedness stuff, is driving a lot of that change. I'm not seeing it through the unions, but I think the unions need to keep that pressure on to look at what we could do for business continuity to drive it.
Sorry, what was the abbreviation you used there, Alexis? Did you say
EPRR, so it's the emergency preparedness.
Emergency preparedness, response and resilience.
There you go. Thank you, Ian. Yeah. So
response and resilience.
So yeah, it's in the event of a major terrorist attack, a major flooding event, heat waves, EPRR will kick in, and it's above and beyond a business continuity. Business continuity is part of it, but so regionally we've got local resilience forums, who are the combined groups of LRFs, who are police, fire, ambulance service, but also councils, various other things that look at climate adaptation. And through that, the EPRR teams, which large organisations have in place, then come in and will implement whatever's required to kind of look at that emergency response. It is an emergency response. It's not that preparation. It's not climate adaptation. And that is one of the things that is a glaringly big gap. And for me, working sustainability, they shove it back to us and say, well, you need to do the climate adaptation, but there is no funding for climate adaptation. There's no funding to kind of go through that process to put the resilience in before the event happens. So EPRR is a really key element of it, but we're only just starting to tap into what we need to do.
Interesting, yeah.
Catherine?
Yeah, we were in a meeting. I do the Just Transition Wakefield, and we were in a planning meeting for a key line of inquiry on the climate change thing yesterday, with the council, and we'd flagged up at a couple of previous meetings that there really has been nothing on the adaptation and emergency planning part, which when you've had sections, flooding in your district, it's a really big problem, because there were bits that couldn't get across bridges and whatever. So we've been flagging it, and because of the Valencia experience, you're saying it matters, it really does matter that you've got a plan, because otherwise the kickback is against, whoever's in charge, that I'm sure the king didn't, the King of Spain didn't expect to be quite the sort of mudslinging at him, but trying to be responded because there wasn't a plan in place. And so that's what sort of this bit was, we'd flagged it up before, and suddenly there was a mention of it. We thought, this is interesting. We go to the schools JCC. I'd taken the heatwave protocol several times. It's been backwards and forwards, and we keep saying, yes, we must discuss this. This would be really good to just, and the service director has discussed it with the DFE, but we then repeat it, and they said, no, you can't close because there isn't a maximum temperature, and then it didn't really apply very much last year. But we put it back on the agenda again, and it feels ridiculous when you're discussing it in December or January, but you have to do it at that point. And we constituted, and they wanted to add in on cold weather, and I said, oh yes, let us do the cold weather things as well, because then we can try and get some equivalence perhaps. But the next meeting was cancelled. So this is the problem. No matter what you're doing, it keeps on getting knocked back because it's, so we'll keep it, it'll go back on again.
Thanks, Catherine. We will go to Karen.
I think it's very much about keeping the pressure on, because we've got at our university, we've got a Sustainable Development Goals annual report. The last one I saw was 2019. So it's one thing that we can do is keep the pressure on and keep pushing for these things that they say they're going to do and make sure that they are doing them.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, that's a long time ago now, isn't it? That is now 6 years out of date. I mean, the world is literally a different place, you know, in terms of temperature at least, than it was back then. I'll just stress, I mean, an element of that heat strike that was on the slide is to remind workers that, I mean, it's not a trade union power, but that every worker has the right to withdraw their labour if they feel unsafe. And so that's, from my experience, a useful thing to remind employers about, that they really do need to have these plans in place, not only because it's the right thing to do and it's protecting their workers, but also if they have a dangerous working place, they may find that they don't have any staff when it's very, very hot, or, you know, in certain circumstances. And so it's in their direct interest to not have to close themselves, or, you know, shut down production or whatever, have more patients than nurses to look after them. We'll go back to you, Graham, and then we'll move on to the next section as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, so this is the final section. Just before, I mean, yeah, interesting, Karen. Yeah, you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. People forget about those, don't they? They don't figure so much, although a lot of employers have actually adopted them, particularly in the higher education sector. So, well, there's 17 of them in there that are clearly way off target for many countries and institutions. But we shouldn't forget that, you know, if an employer's made a commitment around them, then there's something else that need to be held to. Unless we start along with net zero, deciding to backtrack on those ones as well. Right, final slide coming up then. So just bring. Yeah, so this is really, can you hear me okay? Assuming you can. Yeah, it's just the final one really to try and wrap it up to some extent. But obviously we need to try and make sure that unions are earning their dues by making sure the resources are available. And so I think it's always good to keep looking at your union website to see if you feel it is fit for purpose. I mean, around climate issues generally, but more specifically around climate adaptation, because if we're asking reps to actually take this up and use their limited, sometimes non-existent facility time to have discussions with the employer, then they do need some support. And so if you feel yours is lacking, then, you know, we've obviously got things like motions, going to conference as a way of trying to address that. The second point there is that, you know, if you work in local authority or from a community union organising point of view, if your trades council wanted to take this up, then, you know, there's an argument for unions going into discussions with their local and regional authorities to make sure that, you know, this is properly reflected in the plan. Obviously, you know, having it in the plan isn't the be all and end all, but it's a starting point to try and make sure that, you know, this is being addressed. Then going back to International Workers' Memorial Day, I don't know how many people on the call did get involved in the one last year, but that one was specifically around climate risks for workers. And, you know, each year has got a theme. And, you know, if you did take any action, obviously it was a major feature of the Hazards Conference in 2024, then it'd be useful to, you know, make sure that that action was properly assessed to see what lessons can be learned from it. And although it's perhaps not so direct, the theme for Workers' Memorial Day, which as a reminder, is April 28th every year, is artificial intelligence and the risks to people who work off AI platforms. Now, that's something which perhaps, you know, I mean, again, in terms of the climate crossover, I mean, it's yet to be fully kind of understood, but I mean, there are huge energy implications regarding the use of AI and the amount of energy that it uses. So that's one thing that's obviously related to climate stuff. But of course, you know, we know about the health and safety implications for workers from being particularly in that kind of insecure employment. So that's something else that, you know, when we're thinking about what are going to be our priorities for the coming year, you know, whether or not in Yorkshire region or in your workplace wanted to pick up on that at all. And of course, I mentioned it earlier, you know, the TUC year of action that's coming up in 2025, which is going to really kick in as from September and in the lead up to the COP in Brazil in November this year. So, you know, there's no shortage of stuff potentially that's going to be happening this year where the union could start engaging with their employer or with their local authority or with their regional authority or at a national level around these issues. So I guess final discussion point might be worth having a very quick discussion in the time what we've got left around the year of climate action and what the implications are for the region. So let's come out of this.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, we'll go to, is it Martin with his hand? Yeah, Martin.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I've just hopped back in, so apologies if I'm repeating anything that's happened. I think for me, the key things for the year of action in terms of the TU is to kind of, I think I've talked about this before, is about establishing a common thread across the trade union movement, that we should have, you know, sort of 3 to 6 core things that we campaign on very hard and try and get some success in that area and start building traction. Fundamentally, that's the piece for me, is we pick out some core issues and then as a movement we go and target and try and get them. And that yes, there's lots and lots of things that sit within this area and there's really important issues, but fundamentally we just need to get some wins and get the movement moving in the right direction as one. And if we can get some negotiator guides on those particular topics and push them out to the trade unions and get agreement on them and move it, that's ultimately for me where we're going to start the ball rolling down the hill. And if we don't do that and we keep doing this scattergun approach and everyone's doing their own individual pieces, we're not going to build that traction up. We need coordination by the TUC to push to get the unions together. I mean, I talked to our union's rep who goes to the TUC Green Forum, and I don't always hear the best positive things in that space. So the one thing I go away today is go and put a motion into the TUC saying get the TUC to start putting the leadership together, to start putting around these, you know, sort of core issues and then pushing things forward. So it's not a criticism on TUC, it's the unions that need to be pushing TUC and vice versa to be delivering in the space. So it's about a partnership approach where all of us could come together and start helping each other to deliver against this. And separately, just on AI is possibly the biggest risk to workers across a number of different sectors coming up. It's like the mass production revolution. There's going to be a lot of automation where you see service industries, you know, a lot of food industries and all sorts of places where they're going to become automated and people are going to start losing their jobs. And that's why like campaigns around 4 day a week are really important. But as a union, we should be targeting these things, talking about ethically sourced data. Did they get the data that they were training their AIs on ethically? How much energy has been used, but also how much water has been used. We are entering into an age of water crisis now. You've got water shortages in the UK even. So there's some big themes around AI that we should be latching onto, because that's going to be the next big threat to a lot of people. If you can just go and do people's working half the time because you've got a big brain computer doing it for you, you know, there'll still be a human presence, but a lot of industries could change. And that's why we need to adapt to that, start campaigning more on 4-day week. And 4-day week, I do think, should be part of the broad movement of targeted action. We've already had some successful campaigns on that, and PCS is trying to push it, but I do think others are as well. But I just think, for me, there's a piece of work here to do at the start of this year, which we could then spend the rest of the year campaigning on.
Thanks, man. There's a lot there, but yeah, I mean, hard to disagree with anything you're saying. I think on the just because you mentioned the TEC and that year of green action that is suggested to start the end of this year and then run for a year between the two COPs. That's I mean, the kind of thinking behind that at the moment is it seems to be quite grassroots, and so yeah, getting all your ducks in a row to make sure that that action is coordinated is going to be really important, and so that it doesn't sort of fizzle out. It's a good opportunity that was passed through the TEC Congress, obviously, to coordinate that work. So it's a good moment. I'll just as a kind of counter, maybe I think when you were speaking about core actions and demands that are across the movement, there are obviously large demands, significant things that we can all agree on, and we do through TEC motions and things like this, and that's kind of continuously shown. But the opportunity of health and safety is that there is a decentralized network of trade unionists, of people in every workplace that's unionized, who are taking this seriously and adapting these to specific local circumstances. And so, although I don't disagree from what you're saying, that it's a helpful thing to kind of get us all on the same page in many respects. The health and safety aspects of climate change mitigation and adaptation, actually, we can sort of benefit from the decentralized, different solution, different workplace approach as well. And so I just wanted to kind of flag that as a potential. We don't have a huge amount of time left. Does anyone have any additional or last thoughts about that, or about anything more broadly? Catherine, you got your hand?
I'm just typing it in as quick as I can. We're taking a motion to regional TUC we've taken the NEU motion but called it any future-proofing workplaces instead of future-proofing schools, and that calls for a regional conference on trade union action for the climate, and I'm taking it to National Trades Council conference, and for that we're calling for each trades council to coordinate something, as Leeds did in 2019. So to try to get each area doing a conference of some sort, and along with other Green Rep things. So as a place to talk about the stuff that Matthew's just been talking about. Thank you.
That sounds great. Graham, over to you for final thoughts or reflections on those bits.
Yeah, well, not really a lot more to say other than I think trying to agree core issues might not be easy, but because we've got to recognise that there are different approaches within unions. Some of those can be quite serious differences in terms of approach. Of course, that was reflected in last year's motions that came up on climate. Hopefully, those can be resolved. And we can go forward in a united way. And as Martin said, thinking of some key issues, core issues, would be one way of trying to achieve that. So yeah, any regional activity we'd certainly be very interested to promote and support in Greener Jobs Alliance. So if Catherine's motion does get through, I'm sure it will, then keep us posted on any details of that, and we'd be happy to support them. But yeah, in between time, thanks for the opportunity to raise some of these issues with you, and good luck with the last 2 workshops that you're planning to have in this series. And I'm sure we'll be coming across each other again at future events.
Thank you very much, Graham. I mean, yes, thank you for raising these issues as well. I mean, it's an enormous topic, so although 2 hours feels like quite a long time, it's obviously we've not been able to go into a huge amount of detail with any of these things. You know, like looking through the political sphere, the supply chains, air pollution, temperature, next steps, and how we actually implement this in workplaces. Maybe it's not something that can actually be done in such a short period of time, but hopefully it's at least highlighted the kind of topics that are relevant, and it's been really useful to get, at least for me, and hopefully for others, to get a sort of sense of what other people are thinking about this and other workplaces are doing, the experience with that so far. We are recording this, so we'll make that available to everyone who signed up, including those who weren't able to actually attend the live version. I will circulate some Green Jobs Alliance bits, and also the TUCAM resources that you have already referred to, because they're really valuable. It was also mentioned, I think it was Catherine mentioned, the Joint Union Heatwave Protocol document as well, which is already out there in various ways, but is always a good thing to reflect on. So I'll circulate that as well. But thank you all for attending. It's been a really good conversation. There are a few extra comments in the chat, but I probably don't have time to go through them. I'll have a look through them in a moment. But yeah, thank you all very much for your time and for your contributions. It's been really helpful, and I hope it has been for you too. And especially thank you, Graham.